Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to give you my recommendation for a Queen's Gambit repertoire. Now it's been about 4 years since I started playing the Queen's Gambit with white, and I've been facing it with black for more than 8 years now. So I finally have some experience with both sides. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible, as easy to understand as possible. I'm going to try to focus on ideas instead of theory, because if you want to learn all the theory within the Queen's Gambit, it will probably take you months or even years. So we're going to focus on ideas instead. I've imported the entire Queen's Gambit repertoire you're about to see in the video on Nocti. So instead of learning endless lines of theory, what I like to do is I like to import a repertoire on Nocti, and then I like to practice my repertoire by playing games in that repertoire. So go to Nocti, follow the link you can find in the description. You will get directly to this repertoire, and then what you can do, you can select Nocti's difficulty, select the side. Let's say you want to go white here and play a blitz game, and Nocti is going to give you immediate feedback. It's going to play the lines that we have imported in the repertoire, and then of course it's going to try to trick you like a normal human would, making it way more interesting than playing an engine. And if you decide to go premium to unlock all of Nocti's features, use the code Hanging Pawns to get a massive 64% discount. Now let's go to Queen's Gambit theory. I'm going to base the repertoire on the two main sort of systems for black. One of them, let's call it the Queen's Gambit Declined, and the other one, let's call it the Slav/Semi-Slav. Now there are about 20 different openings we could be facing, and I'm going to talk about all of them. But in the vast majority of your games, in this position after d4, d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit, black plays one of these two moves and plays one of the main lines of the Queen's Gambit Declined, or the Slav or the Semi-Slav. So what's the difference between the two moves? First of all, when black plays e6, the option to liberate the c8 bishop is gone. You're not playing bishop f5 or bishop g4 any longer, regardless of what white does next. Whereas playing c6 gives you the option, should white, let's say, play the quiet Slav, something like this, gives you the option to play bishop f5 here, which I do when I have black in this position. So that's the one major difference between these two moves. So there are people who prefer playing c6 with black like me. There are people who prefer playing e6, and there are different reasons for that. And other than these two moves, we're going to be looking at the e5, the Albin. We're going to have a look at the very risky and you could say unsound Baltic defense, and the Chigorin with knight c6. So first of all, let's start with e6, the Queen's Gambit Declined. I'm going to say immediately that I think that knight c3 is an easier move to play than knight f3. In many cases, the positions are going to transpose, but because I'm going to be recommending a specific repertoire and not learn everything in the Queen's Gambit video, that this is not such a video. You can watch my playlist on the Queen's Gambit where you're going to see an objective comparison of options. This is my very biased recommendation onto how to play the Queen's Gambit, and actually the way I've been playing it for years now. So knight c3 instead of knight f3. Why? First of all, in many cases, when black tries to do something on the queen side quickly, like take this pawn, play a, let's say, Queen's Gambit accepted or something similar, having this knight on c3 is very useful. So in my opinion, dc becomes harder to play in most cases after knight c3 instead of knight f3. Secondly, having a knight on f3 is very useful in some lines of the Catalan, or in some Catalan type positions, whereas I don't recommend ever, almost never, playing g3. So having a knight on c3 is beneficial. It supports the early e4, so in some lines e4 is going to be playable much sooner than had we played knight f3. Also, very importantly, we avoid many lines for black by playing knight c3. So in most cases, black is going to go knight f6 here, And let's call this chapter The Queen's Gambit Declined Exchange Variation, because that's what I recommend we do against knight f6. We are going to take, and go bishop g5. So this will be the basis of our repertoire against 2e6, and this is what's going to happen most of the time. Before we have a look at that, I want to show you the alternatives. So one alternative is black aiming for the node boom, and if we make a move like knight f3 here, black can take on c4, enter the node boom. We will not allow that. We will play the move e3, and then black is just going to transpose into a normal semi-Slav defense, which we're going to see in part 3 of this video. So what I'm going to recommend is easy ways of getting the position you want, regardless of what black plays. Now, one exception to playing knight f6, which we do have to know, or a few exceptions, let's start with them, are the moves bishop e7, bishop to b4, which I think has a name. I just call it the Ragozin line in the Queen's Gambit exchange, because that's what makes sense to me, and then the Janovsky variation with a6. Let's begin with bishop e7. What's the idea? As we saw in the Queen's Gambit Declined exchange, normal variation, we enter this Carlsbad structure. Black has a knight on f6, we go bishop g5. Bishop e7 prevents bishop g5, so it's taking away the most useful square away from our bishop. Now, I used to play bishop f4 here. I used to play that, and I had a game 4 days ago, and I got a very pleasant IQP position, but I did a lot of analysis on the opening since that game, and I have decided that playing a Carlsbad and then playing bishop f4 is slightly superior. So this is basically a Caro-Kann position in reverse, an exchange Caro-Kann in reverse, where white has a normal b4, b5, minority attack type of position. Well, let me just show you that. So if we go into this from a normal Caro-Kann, so exchange variation with bishop d3 and knight c6 and c3, you can see that the situation is the same, just with the colors reversed. And in the Charusek variation, we just have the same position with white, and we get to play bishop f4. So this is definitely an improved exchange Caro-Kann. So black plays c6, normal, very standard Carlsbad structure. If you want, you can watch my video on the Carlsbad. If you're a complete beginner, you actually should, because there are many strategic ideas in this structure that are going to help you navigate any opening in the structure, be it the Queen's Gambit Declined or the Caro-Kann. Black plays bishop f5, and now I'm going to recommend the move g4, which is the best move. It's a very risky move. You can find all of that in all the lines in the repertoire. There are alternatives, but I actually like playing this way. h4, and now black takes on h4, and we go queen b3. I think this is a very nice way for white to play. If you want something safer, there are definitely alternatives, and you can play bishop d3, you can play knight f3, you can play rook c1, you can play a3. It's all fine. So that's the Charusek variation. I don't think it's too challenging once you enter a Carlsbad and play bishop b4. Then bishop b4. What's it called? It's called Queen's Knight variation. It doesn't even have a name, just bishop b4. I call it the Ragozin line, as I said. Once again, against this we take. They take back, although technically in this position they could take with the queen. It's best for black to take back with the pawn. We once again go bishop f4, and then after c6 we go e3. And I mean, this is just a very pleasant position in my opinion. In fact, having this bishop on b4 could be beneficial for white, because if we want to go a3, b4, b5, very often this bishop is a tempo gain. So I don't think 3 bishop b4 is a big deal. And the same goes for the Janovsky variation. I never really understood why black would play this. I mean, of course the threat is to take and then play b5. I understand that. But if we don't allow dc and we just take, then why did you play a6? Okay, maybe I don't have knight b5 or bishop b5, but I don't think that's worth a whole tempo. And once again, since we don't have bishop g5, we go bishop f4. And there are a couple of lines here. Black usually plays with c6, but I can also go knight f6. Let's say c6, e3, bishop d6, takes, bishop d3. This is just a position in which black has played a6 and white has a knight on c3 and the bishop on d3, and white is slightly better. So after e6, knight c3, I don't think there are any really critical moves we have to worry about. As long as we remember to enter a Carlsbad and play bishop f4, we're going to be fine. Now, the mainline stuff, the exchange variation. Firstly, why exchange? Because I like entering a Carlsbad structure with white, because I like playing it with black a tempo down with a much worse bishop. I think having it a tempo up with two very active bishops, one on g5, one on d3, is ideal. And secondly, it's such a rich strategic position that could be played three different ways that I think it's actually very rewarding to study this with white with both sides. Now, I'm not going to go into all the lines. I'll just explain the ideas, because there are about 20 different move orders when you count what black and white can do to reach pretty much the same positions. There are, of course, a lot of subtleties. I'm simplifying things here, but I'll try to explain the ideas instead of showing you the differences between the 20 lines. So let's say they start with bishop e7. That being said, black can also start with c6 or knight bd7. Everything's fine. So we go e3. Black can castle, black can play c6, black can play whatever, several moves. And now we can start with queen c2 or bishop d3. I prefer starting with bishop d3. Knight b to d7, let's say. Once again, there are alternatives. c6. When we have reached this typical Carlsbad structure, our pieces are lined up against h6. In many cases, black is going to go rook e8, knight f8 to overprotect and to liberate this knight. Sometimes black is going to go h6 and knight e4 or knight h5 to exchange this bishop. And generally speaking, black is going to be trying to exert pressure down the e-file, whereas white has three different options. And I'm going to show you the three options before knight f3, actually. Knight f3 is the move that I prefer playing. You don't have to play knight f3. In fact, most people play knight g2. This gives you an additional option with white, although it reduces your control over e5. Excuse me, I ate 100 strawberries and now it's a weird feeling. So why do you play knight g2 instead of knight f3? One of the main plans in the exchange is to go f3, e4 and break this central bind black has with the d-pawn, which is something you cannot afford as black as easily in the Caro-Kann. And in many variations of the exchange Caro-Kann, you will see this setup for black. They go g6, bishop g7, then they go knight h6, f6, knight f7, and then they play for e5. And as black, it takes a long time to prepare e5, whereas as white, in the exchange Queen's Gambit declined, e4 is much easier to play. So you can get away with knight g2, f3, rook e1, let's say you need to defend this pawn, and e4. So that's one idea. The other idea is to go queen c2, and black does something, and you castle queenside. That's also playable. Also often done with the knight on e2. And the third way to play for white is to put the knight on f3. Black does something, you go queen c2, black does something, you castle, and then to play for a minority attack. And in this position, the most common move is h3. This is black's worst piece. It has no squares if you play h3, so that's strategically, that's a very good idea. It could go to e6, but e6 isn't such a useful square. And the third way to play is to go a3, b4, b5, and play for a minority attack. Again, if you haven't seen my video on that, you can watch a separate video on the minority attack. Just search for it on the channel. So that's the Queen's Gambit. And I have tried to simplify it as much as I could. This isn't the entire Queen's Gambit, it's just most of the lines you could enter, there will always be some very minor sidelines, but you will be able to apply the same principles. Now, one thing we cannot put in the same chapter at all after the Queen's Gambit declined, after knight c3, Black has the option to play c5. And we are going to have a look at this in a whole separate chapter right now. So we looked at bishop e7 and knight f6 and bishop b4 and a6 and c6. Now we look at c5. Now, again, you can watch the full playlist on the tarrasch if you want to. It's a very complex opening, but just like the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit declined, we are transposing to the Caro-Kann, just to the pawn of Caro-Kann. So after c takes d5, I should mention that there is the move cd4, the Shara Gambit. You can watch my full video on that. I would just in short recommend that you play queen a4 check before taking the pawn, because once you provoke bishop d7 and recapture the pawn, knight c6 isn't possible because the pawn actually isn't pinned, because the bishop is blocking the queen, in short. But that's about it. Most people, 9 out of 10 times, are going to recapture on d5. And now what we are going to do, once again, let me show you the position when Black plays it. Let's enter a pawn of Caro-Kann. So here, c4, knight f6. Here, let's say bishop g5, g6. We are going to be entering, sorry, bishop e6 and then g6. Let's say a3, g6. Now, Black normally takes. I'll just show you what happens when they don't take. Let's say knight f3, bishop g7. This is the same structure that we get in the tarrasch, just we get it with white, and we aren't forced to play the move bishop e6 or bishop e3. So let's have a look at that. So after c5, e takes, knight f3, knight c6, g3. Now, if we had a bishop on e3, it would be the same position out of the pawn of Caro-Kann, but now there is no need because there is no real pressure on d4 yet, and we could play bishop e3, fine, putting pressure on c5, but there are better moves than that. Bishop f6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castles. I prefer the move bishop g5. And now Black has a couple of options, c4, bishop e6, or cd. One of the main ways to play is cd, knight d, and now h6. If you watch the channel, you may have seen my game from 10 days ago in the Croatian League, where my opponent played the suboptimal queen b6 and they gained a winning position almost immediately out of the opening with the move bishop e3. So that's definitely an option. Just remember to play bishop e3. So in the tarrasch, we get this position that's, let me go back here, very similar to the pawn of Caro-Kann with colors reversed, almost identical. So all the ideas are going to be applicable here. Black has a couple of ways to play. Black could play c4 and play for a queenside 3-2 pawn majority. Black could take on d4 and accept, which they usually do. This is a normal position, and accept an IQP where they likely are going to try to liquidate the pawn. We can try to put pressure on the d5 pawn, and it's just going to be a very, very pleasant small edge for white. So, of course, there have been 50 books written on the tarrasch. I'm just trying to share the simple, basic ideas. You need to go into a lot more depth, especially if you play this on a higher level. But I just think that going into the main line of the tarrasch simplifies things a lot, especially if you know the pawn of Caro-Kann is black. So that's the tarrasch. Now we finally move on to the second most popular move, c6, the Slav or the Semi-Slav. Once again, we don't play knight f3, we play the move knight c3. We are consistent and we always start with knight c3 on move 3 instead of knight f3. Now, there are many moves here, or sorry, here, after knight f3. What I do as black, if you've ever seen any of my videos, is e6 going into a semi-Slav. So we're going to be looking at e6 semi-Slav, the second most popular dc, which is the Czech Slav, and you can sort of divided into the Wiesbaden and the Krause variation, which could also be the Karlsbad variation. In many ways, the Czech Slav and the Semi-Slav are the two most complicated versions. And then we have the two less complicated, which is the Chabanenko and the schlechter. Whoa. Whoa. So A6 and G6. This is what you're going to be facing most of the time. In my experience, people usually play the Semi-Slav, although I've just finished a tournament 20 hours ago, and there were two Czech Slavs in the same very tough Krause variation. Or sorry, actually Wiesbaden variation. So let's begin. Let's begin with the Czech Slav because that's the most concrete of all. So black's idea, of course, is to, take the pawn. If allowed, they're going to go b5 and e6 and bishop b4 and keep the pawn and win on the queen side. This is what I do in the anti-Moscow and in the node boom, and it's just a normal, regular way to try and win a pawn. White plays a4. The reason a4 is a very important move is because it prevents b5. Note that this pawn is pinned, so black doesn't have the option to play a6 in order to reinforce b5. Let's imagine a6, white makes a random move like, I don't know, bishop f4, b5, a b5, c b5, knight b5. If you go a b5, then rook a8, black loses the rook and the game. Therefore, a4 prevents black from at least easily defending this pawn. So black goes bishop f5, and here there is a branching of ways. There are three moves here. I'm not even going to mention the other two. I'll just say that I'm going to recommend the most concrete line with knight e5. And there is a crazy way for black to play here, and the sound way. The crazy way involves a very well-known piece sacrifice on move 11, or move 9 actually, which actually, that's what I wanted to say, has been played twice during the tournament I just finished, which is, I don't remember seeing it over the board ever, and I saw two of these games. So that begins with e6. The sound way is the Krause variation with knight bd7. So the Wiesbaden is e6. And white could play normal moves. I guess you could get away with normal moves, but there is a very, very sharp line here which starts with f3, and of course the very simple idea is to go e4 and take, and then also gain space on the king side. But black plays for tricks and the initiative and a couple of pawns for a piece. Black's idea is not to move the bishop away. We go e4, and of course if the bishop moves away, then white is just winning. If you go bishop g6, the engine says plus 0.8 for white after bishop c4, which is on a high level a huge advantage. And of course white has the center. This bishop isn't really good. White has very easy development, and white is definitely better. So the line goes bishop e4. This knight is pinned. Therefore black takes 2 pawns for a piece. We take back. Knight takes, now there's pressure on c3, so we have to play bishop d2, hanging the d pawn, therefore queen d4. Now it's already 3 pawns for the piece, the knight on e5 is hanging, the c3 square is attacked 3 times, so we need to do something. So we take on e4. Queen takes e4 check, queen e2, we have to block the check, bishop d2, the queen is pinned, so king takes, queen d5 check, king c2, knight a6. And this, you could say, is the beginning of the line. The first 14 moves are relatively forced for both sides, and again, people are going to play this a tempo without even thinking. I think the best way to play here is knight takes c4, and then if I don't play the Czech Slav, I play the Semi-Slav, but if I did have this position with black, I would castle queenside, because that seems the most promising. In any case, black has three pawns for a bishop, so white should technically be better, as long as the pawns aren't dangerous. So you decide which side you would like to take. I prefer white, therefore I don't fear going into this line. If you don't want to go into this line, after a4, bishop f5, just don't play knight e5. The alternatives are e3 or knight h4. e3 being by far the safest move. You just take the pawn and get on with your life. Okay, now, after knight e5, black doesn't have to go e6. Black can play the Krause with knight bd7. And we just take on c4. And here black can play queen c7 or knight b6. Either way, it's really not as challenging. I think black really should play the Wiesbaden variation. Let's say knight b6, knight back to e5, a5, e3, g6, bishop d3. It's just a slight edge for white. And eventually, once we develop and castle, we are going to be playing for e4. With a slight edge. So that's the Czech Slav. Next up, let's have a look at the two, before moving on to the Semi-Slav, let's have a look at the Chabanenko and the Schlechter. The Chabanenko, in my opinion, is a very masochistic opening. And I've seen many games where black just got destroyed very easily because of this idea c5. And there was a game between someone and Alechin, or excuse me, Alechin and someone, and that someone, I don't remember who, ended up playing a6 in the triangle structure, Slav structure, but it was later on in the game, and Alechin played c5, and that became the thematic way to destroy this structure. That game became, you know, a well-known example. Now, why is this in theory bad for black? Well, you have these two weaknesses, and it's very hard to play b6 or do anything with a5. So you're basically left with breaking the structure with e5. If you don't manage to play e5, you are strategically much worse. On a high level, you are losing unless you play e5, because there's nothing else you can do. White just has a space advantage and a useful square on b6 to work with. Not to mention that if, let's say, black isn't experienced and black plays something like, I don't know, e6, your bishop is doomed to being on e7. Let's just do something crazy. Let's say I do this. You never go e5. I'm just cementing my knight here. I'll cement my other knight. Okay, let's cement the other knight on b6. I'll just be very generous with blunders for black. Let's say we get this position. You can see the type of problems black would find themselves in if they don't know what they are doing. So the Chabanenko Slav is positionally suspicious, or not really. That's, excuse me, cross it out. It's not positionally suspicious. It's positionally risky, and black is taking on a lot of responsibility. Black is fine as long as they know what to do. So let me just delete this e6 thing. Black is playing for e5, and there are many ways to try and do that. White should be preventing that. One of the most common draws in the Chabanenko is this, where they just repeat. Something like that. But when they play knight hf6, we aren't going to repeat. Unfortunately, our bishop isn't controlling e5 anymore, but we go queen c2. And black has many options. I think the most popular one is g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles. And now, as I said, black needs to play for e5. And black is going to achieve e5. It's really not easy to prevent that. What we want to make sure is that we have sufficient support for d4, so that after e5 we can take on e5 without allowing d4 from coming at all or coming with tempo. And we also have to have the c-pawn either defended or tactically defended once e5 comes. So for example, rook a1, let's say, I don't know, knight f8, which is a normal move, queen b3. And now if they threaten to play e5, we are ready. We are, you know, everything is solidified. So just pay attention to when e5 comes, is c5 hanging, is d4 happening. So that's the Chabanenko. Even if black knows what they're doing, e5 will be difficult to achieve, and I've seen very good players lose the Chabanenko. The schlechter. The schlechter with g6 is probably the safest of all options, and you could call it the sort of semi-Grunfeld, whatever. Grunfeld with c6 is just a safe position. Your bishop comes out to f5, you accept this position with gf5, you have control over the e4 square. I really don't have anything bad to say about the schlechter. I've played it myself with black, I faced it with white, it's just a normal position. What I prefer doing is cd, cd, and bishop f4. Once again, the same thing we did in the Queen's Gambit Declined, in the Janovsky and in the Charusek. Bishop g7, e3 castles, h3, once again, at least slightly limiting the bishop, knight c6, bishop d3, a6, preventing knight b5, c7, castles, bishop f5. This is normal. This doubling of pawns is actually fine. You don't actually have to take. I've had games where I didn't take. I had games where I took. Because this now enables black to have firm control over e4. So, you know, against the schlechter, you just have to play chess, and it's going to be a symmetrical pawn structure most of the time. Play for the c-file, try not to do anything stupid. There isn't any sort of theory or very thematic plans anyone could teach you that could help you win games quickly. Now, before we move on to other openings, I just want to point out one very significant mistake, which black can do in many different positions, but the most important one is here. And I'll take you back to 2016. I had just started playing chess. I was playing in my club, and we were playing a blitz tournament. And I got paired against Grandmaster Misho Cebalo. He's no longer alive, but he used to be one of the strongest Croatian players. He was over 2500 when we played. And we got to this position in a blitz game 3+2. I had black, I played not e6. Instead, I played bishop f5. I didn't know anything. And he beat me very quickly. And after the game, he said, "Oh, bishop f5, black is almost losing." And I said, "Why?" And I mean, I knew how I lost the game, but I couldn't understand everything. At that time, I hadn't read a single page in a single chess book. I've played only one tournament, and I really had no idea what I was doing. So the reason is cd, cd, and queen b3. And now this is a double attack on d5 and on b7. And if you play a move like e6, you are going to lose. Let's say e6, e4, your bishop's attacked, so you probably take. And now I have the option to play bishop b5 and knight e5 and queen a4, or of course take on b7. So let's just say you play b6, and then I play e4, and then d4, knight e5. How do you defend this? I think in the game, I actually played an okay move against Misho Cebalo. I think I played bishop c8 here, which is bad, but it's not immediately losing. But it proves the point that bishop f5 makes no sense. Most people who don't know anything will play a move like b6, losing the game on the spot. And the thematic way to punish that is just e4 with tempo on the bishop. When they take, knight e5. And now when bishop b5 comes, black actually resigns. I don't know, e6, bishop b5, knight d7, I don't even know which one. Let's say knight bd7, and just g4, g5, misplacing this knight and winning the knight on d7 because the queen is the only defender. Something like that. So I just wanted to mention bishop f5. In most cases, bishop f5 is a very bad move for black. And that's precisely why we start with the move knight c3. In this position, if black plays bishop f5, the same thing happens. It just doesn't work. When there is a knight on c3, on f3, the difference is huge because our knight on c3 isn't there and it's not putting pressure on d5. So when you play knight c3, bishop f5 is almost always unplayable. All right, QGA, or the Queen's Gambit accepted. Not a very popular opening, but it's still, I think it's gaining popularity in recent years. So DC4. Instead of E6 or C6, black just takes the pawn and, you know, tries to hold on to it in some cases. There are three main moves here, knight f3, e3, and e4. I have decided to go very aggressive with this particular opening and to recommend e4. Previously, I've always been playing e3, which is sort of the rarest of the three moves. It allows the least amount of complications and, you know, it's just tame. e4 is the sharpest option, not only because you're sort of committing to a broad center, but also because you're giving black four very concrete options to choose from. Black has e5, c5, knight c6, knight c6 and knight f6. So these four moves. e5 is the most common move and the sharpest move. We don't do anything here, we just go knight f3, and after ed4 we take on c4. And our idea, of course, is, well, firstly, we aren't really gambiting a pawn. We will likely get this pawn back, but we're going for rapid development. So black needs to do something and try and develop their pieces. If they blunder with something like c5, then we already have ideas like knight e5, and the only way to defend is bishop e6, and then we have queen h5. That I'm just making this up, but this is just an example. I mean, it's already tactically loose. g6, bishop h3 could work. I don't know. It seems suspicious. So on bishop c4, black needs to start developing. We castle, bishop e6, bishop b5. Something like this happens and we play for a huge deal of initiative. That's what happens in main lines with e4, so we aren't accepting slow positions where we just take back the pawn on c4 and, you know, play for equality. That being said, if you want those positions, I have played them, you can play e3, you will get them. Now black doesn't have to play e5 against e4. They can simply go knight f6. And this is, I think, the trickiest line we have to learn. e5, knight d5, and bishop c4, because now there is knight b6. We have to move the bishop back, and there is knight c6. I should say that the pawn isn't hanging due to the famous check and winning the queen. But after knight c6, the pawn is hanging. We have to defend, so knight e2. The reason we don't play knight f3 is because on bishop g4 we have f3. So getting rid of that pin. f3, bishop e6, and knight bc3. This is very committal, and it reminds me of some lines in the Caro-Kann for white. Having a pawn on f3 isn't pleasant, let me just put it that way. This is a very risky structure. It may seem like everything is fine, but there will be a lot of weaknesses in this position if black ever plays c5 and starts weakening this, and we are ever on g1 with our king. That being said, it's fine for white. I mean, you have ideas. The other two moves are knight c6 and c5. Knight c6, I think, is the least problematic of all the moves. We just defend the pawn, and on bishop g4 we play d5, and everything is perfect. Knight e5, bishop f4. We aren't afraid of taking on f3. That's all fine. Eventually, we are going to get the pawn back. And why did black play knight c6, e5, g6? So I don't really like this line for black. And finally c5, which is Grunfeld fashion, but you don't have a bishop on g7, so I don't think it's as dangerous. d5, knight f6, knight c3, b5. And if b4, that's almost immediately losing. The idea behind bishop f4 is we want pressure on c7, so if black tries to win the pawn on e4 by playing b4, we are going to go knight b5, and we are going to be very, very close to winning, because on knight a6 we have bishop c4. So black usually plays something like queen a5, and then we go a4, we're threatening to take. Once again on b4 there is knight b5, so I don't know. Black takes on e4 because the knight is pinned, knight e2 defending, knight d6, ab5, and I like this for white. It's actually one of the main reasons I chose to play e4, because of this 3c5 idea, because I think long term black is just worse because of these 2 pawns, and white has a very healthy pawn structure. Now finally, we have 3 minor openings. I will go through them from the least likely I'll go through the Baltic first, then the Albin, then the Chigorin. I should say that I have been playing the Queen's Gambit for 4 years. I have never faced either of them, so chances of you encountering these over the board are very slim. Although online, I have faced... Wait, have I faced them? Maybe in a bullet game. I don't remember ever facing them in a training game. So the Baltic with bishop f5 is just bad. The reason this is bad is because we are going to gain a tempo on the queen if the queen ever appears on d5. So we take on d5. And if queen d5, the engine says white is winning after knight c3, queen d8, e4. This is already plus 2.2. And I mean, it's clear to see why. So most people on cd5 take on b1. And we play rook b1. And it's clear that white is better. Black has given up the bishop pair. Black is not going to lose the tempo with knight c3, but after queen d5, knight f3, something like e6, we have the bishop pair. We are going to easily advance the b pawn if we want to. Black has developed the queen, and that's it. Also, queen a2 just loses. If instead of e6, queen a2, then we go bishop d2, and on knight f6 we go queen c2. And if you try to hold on to the pawn, something like c6, then once again we go e4 and destroy black. So the Baltic really isn't a big deal. Now the Albin. The Albin is a serious opening. So e4, e5. I've made a separate video on the Albin. It's actually very interesting, but I think if you know this one line I'm going to show you, you're going to be fine. Again, I'm not going to take you through 20 moves of theory. If you know this one line, you should be fine. So you take on e5, they go d4, you go knight f3. This is forced. They go knight c6. And now instead of complicating things, we go a3. And this idea is twofold. Firstly, we are preventing bishop b4 or knight b4, but mostly bishop b4. Secondly, we are preparing to go b4, bishop b2, both defending e5 and putting pressure on d4. And thirdly, we may be able to advance with b5, misplacing this knight, maybe keeping the pawn. So most people go knight g7, b4, knight g6, bishop b2. And fine, we are going to give the pawn back. But if knight e5, then knight e5, knight e5, and we can take on d4. That's not the best idea. People play e3 as well, but I actually like bishop takes d4. Why not? They take on c4, we can now go e3. Instead of doing that, you can just go e3 straight away. And of course, if d takes e3, then this is busted. King takes d8, bishop e5, black loses the knight. So this one small idea with a3 and b4 and bishop b2, it doesn't really refute the Chigorin, but white is so much better and has a very simple position that I think, sorry, not the Chigorin, the Albin, that I think the Albin is borderline unplayable. And finally, after d4, d5, c4, the Chigorin, I'm not the right person to comment on the Chigorin. I don't like it. I don't know what else to say, and I know that there are many ways to play against it. You can play e3, cd, knight f3, knight c3. I like cd, and on queen d, I like the move e3. And what I want to do here, we don't have knight c3 because the pawn's hanging. The queen would just take on d4, but after d3, we do have knight c3 now. So black has only one way to complicate things, e5. If they don't play e5, then they will never fight against our center. And on e5, we go knight c3. And now either the queen moves or the knight needs to be pinned. Moving the queen is a loss of tempo, so people play bishop b4. And now when we go bishop d2 and the queen is hanging again, black must take on c3. When they take, we take with the b-pawn, we have the bishop pair and a slightly better position. Our plan is simple, we go c4, d5, put the bishop on c3, activate the bishop pair and try to claim that we have an advantage, which we do. If you turn on the engine says 0.4, 0.5, isn't really impressed, but let's say c4, the queen moves, d5, knight e7, we can play queen a4 check, we can play queen b1, we can play queen b3. I think it's worth having the bishop pair in this position. So that's the Chigori. So I hope I managed to show you how to play the Queen's Gambit in a relatively short amount of time. This is my personal repertoire. This is the way I've been playing it. Oh, excuse me, I didn't go over the Semi-Slav. Oh my god, sorry for that. Wow, okay, Semi-Slav. Crazy. Okay, so after knight f3, sorry, e6. Wow, this is actually the basis of the repertoire. I want to talk about this after the Slav lines. But in the Semi-Slav, we go e3. There are other lines. There are lines with bishop g5. We are going to go e3 and invite the normal meran positions. There are positions which I call Dreyev's alternatives. They also have a different name, lines with bishop d6 for black. But in 99% of games, you're going to play black is going to play knight bd7. We're going to play bishop d3, and then black is going to take on c4. I've had this position in probably 100 tournament games as black, and some with white. Dreyev's alternative is bishop d6, and if you want to learn the Semi-Slav for black, I would recommend Alexei Dreyev's Meran and Anti-Meran. That's one book, and the second book is Moscow and Anti-Moscow. And also you can watch separate videos on my channel on all four openings. So, bishop d3 is both good and bad at the same time. In order to understand the Meran and Anti-Meran positions, we have to understand that black's main concern here is the bishop on c8. So when we play dc4, black takes, we have to take back, and then black's plan is b5, a6, and c5, or b5, c5, some other way. So when they play b5, we have to choose a square for the bishop. There are three moves. I prefer bishop d3, which is the main move. And now there are three ways for black to play. Dreyev's alternative, we don't look at that. You can find the lines, but it's really not that great nor easy to play. Bishop b7 and a6. Throughout my career, I've always played a6. Why does black play a6? Black plays a6 to defend the b-pawn, to be able to play c5. And I faced the same mistake in many tournament games. White would just castle here, give black c5 for free, and black is equal or slightly better. Against a6, we don't castle, we go e4. Okay, black needs to play c5, develop the bishop, and now black's strategic goal has been achieved. This is one of my favorite positions with black, and in some lines I know the theory more than 20 moves deep. White has two options here, e5 or d5. e5 is the old main line, d5 is the Reynolds. I prefer playing the Reynolds. When I actually tried to decide on the repertoire, I looked at both lines in depth again, but for the first time ever from White's perspective. In tournament games up until now, I played the anti-Meran, which is queen c2 instead of bishop d3 on move 8, but here I actually chose the Reynolds because I had a very painful loss to a Serbian grandmaster or a Montenegrin grandmaster in Dubrovnik at the beginning of the year. So, c4 takes, if takes then takes. This is just a forced theory, fe6, bishop c2. This is where the game begins. And white has there's one flaw in white's position. These pawns are marching forward. If we trade off the pieces, black is better. If we keep the pieces on the board, black's king is absurd. There are ideas like knight g5, putting pressure on e6. All the pieces are very, very close. In fact, I lost that game against Nikčević Nebojša due to a kingside attack. So what we have to do here as black is prevent e5. So black will play the move queen c7, black will play knight c5 to defend the pawn on e6, and black will try not to get mated before their queenside pawn majority starts moving forward. As white, what we want to do is we want to make sure that this queenside pawn majority is absolutely insignificant and that we can do something on the king side first. So we play moves like knight g5 or knight d4. I prefer knight g5. Knight c5, black needs to defend. e5, okay, you have to take that. Rook e1, look at white's pieces. And white has, of course, given up a pawn, but white has a ton of initiative, and even though I studied this for black many, many times, for many, many hours, I still find it very hard to play these positions for black as soon as I don't know the exact theoretical move. Because if white makes a mistake, so what? If black makes a mistake, it's very likely that you lose the game. So that's what we do against, against a6. And in many ways, that's going to be the basis of our repertoire. So we play bishop d3 and they play a6. Now I just want to show you one idea that we're gonna use against bishop b7. And when I was just starting out, I was always afraid as black in this position. I would normally avoid bishop b7 and go a6, but I was always afraid of white playing a3, which is what I recommend here. The idea behind a3 is pretty simple. We want to play b4, and if we play b4, then c5 doesn't get played, and then this bishop is just garbage. So if, you know, I don't know what to suggest. There is no way to prevent b4, really. If black tries a5, then we just castle, and now this pawn is not protected, so they have prevented b4, but after c5, there really is no way to hold on to c5, so most people are going to continue with b4. And now we go knight e4, still playing against c5, and so on and so forth. But it's very rare. On a3, black usually just says, okay, I'll just keep doing stuff and eventually play a5. They castle first, queen c2, now a5. But they still haven't played c5. So I find that, that a3 is why I'd never play bishop b7 as black, and a3 is exactly what I'm going to recommend in the meran, because I think it's very problematic. The line should go something like this: e4, e5. As a general rule, when white plays e4 in the semi-Slav and black doesn't play e5, they are losing or about to lose. So it's almost always correct to play e5. d5, knight e5, knight e5, bishop e5, something like h3. We want to fight against a Greek gift. It does seem scary. And now black is in trouble. What now? What do you do with the bishop? Do you go back to c8? No, most people play bishop a6. But now we can go rook b1 and b4. So that's what I like to do strategically against the semi-Slav. Now, once again, you can watch my separate videos on the meran and every other variation I've just shown you. It should take you a long time to master this repertoire, so visit Nocti by following the link in the description and learn this repertoire by playing it against Nocti. I have imported all of this on Nocti, so it's going to be playing the lines I showed you against you and coming up with, deviations a human would come up with. Thank you for watching. I know that this was a lot of information. I tried to make it as simple as I could. Let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.